Welcome to the Intimate Marriage Podcast, where I teach educated, successful couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships so that you can stop compromising and start feeling fully alive in your relationship. I'm Alexandra Stockwell, aka the Intimacy Doctor. I'm a physician, a relationship and intimacy coach, and I'm an intimate marriage expert. My husband and I have been married for 27 years. We have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing marriage. I've shown hundreds of couples how to do so as well. So if you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place. I will show you how. Now, let's dive in. I'm really happy to be welcoming you, Dr. Weili Gray, to the Intimate Marriage Podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Alexandra. I'm thrilled to be here. And as I've told you personally before, you've actually been you've been very influential in my personal growth journey, especially reading your book. Uncompromising intimacy. You've really added a lot of richness to my life, so I thank you for that.
Thank you. You know, you've been so generous and articulate because we really connected through Messenger on Facebook where you shared that. And to me, it just like came out of nowhere, this generous, soulful, very contemplative, and also kind of visionary attitude. And so I just have appreciated so much our various conversations along the way. And I'm really excited for this one, the first one that other people get to hear. But let me give you a proper introduction. So Dr. Weili Gray, you're in Vermont now where it's raining, and which is not that unusual, but I'm in California in the San Francisco Bay Area where it's raining, which is unusual. So it's fun that that's happening. Anyway, I love knowing that you live in this tranquil countryside of Vermont. You're a sleep doctor. And actually, let me have you introduce yourself. Go ahead and share what you want people to know about you.
Yeah, sure. So I am an employed sleep physician in rural Vermont. I'm married. I think we just had our 15th anniversary.
Oh, happy anniversary.
Thank you. And my husband and I, we have 3 kids, and ranging from one just turned 7 and the oldest just turned 14. So a range of ages. And I am also the founder of Dare to Dream Physician Travel, and have a weekly podcast where I actually had the pleasure of interviewing you, Alexandra, on it. And I am all about really, advocating for people to live their dreams, to figure out what their dreams are and live their dreams as soon as possible, because we don't know whether tomorrow is guaranteed to any of us. And it's all about, taking advantage of being alive today.
Okay, fantastic. I actually want to ask you about being a sleep doctor, but I'm going to resist that and instead go right for the thing that I want to talk about. So we all are familiar with people in business who, let's take J.K. Rowling, for example. She was a single mom living on welfare, and now she has, 7, 8 figures. I don't actually know what her net worth is, but the point is that the change from really being impoverished to being financially successful, as well as successful in other ways, happened very quickly. And we're familiar with that phenomenon. No one can count on it happening, but there are just mostly in the area of business, we have stories, things we're familiar with, where people start with very little and in a very short amount of time, they turn it around, they have a major success. We don't really know exactly how that happens, but we've heard of it in business. There is an area where that is pretty much unheard of, which is in the arena of intimacy and sexuality and richness in family life. Like, I think in general, we tend to think of that as much more something that can steadily increase, but it takes cultivation, it takes nourishing. It's more like the seeds get planted, and then over time, the harvest eventually continues to come in. I think the one exception to that, to be really frank, is like a woman who has had low libido and no interest in sex and then gets divorced, and then suddenly she's like ready and her libido is high and has, like, there's this major life change that happens, and then there is this change. But when we think of what happens between two people, I mean, I know that my clients are always so surprised just from the first session how much things change, but things don't change from stagnant, ho-hum, mundane, sometimes pleasant, to erotically alive and passionate and really extraordinary in the course of a day. They definitely can go from the former to the latter, no question about that. And the possibility can happen very quickly. But the actual implementation and lived experience, it takes some time. It takes dedication. There's no real equivalent to fast food. A really high quality sex life, a high quality life of emotional intimacy, it's more like going for gourmet food, and it takes time to cook and plan the menu and which table setting, and there's so many nuances that enhance the whole experience that we don't expect it to happen with the snap of a finger. When I think of family life, man and a woman married with 3 kids, and they have their typical family culture, and maybe the wife wants to travel more, and so they begin to make some changes. And, you know, looking back over the past 5 years or 10 years, you can see your lifestyle has changed. But you blow all those assumptions out of the water. And I'd love for you to tell your story about how you have changed the culture of your family, the excitement and passion and zest for life, not specifically about sex unless you feel like sharing that, but let's just start simply with expired passports to, 6 international trips this year without anything other than desire influencing it. When there is crisis, change can happen rapidly, but that's entirely involuntary. You have made the most tremendous changes in the most ensouled and efficient way, but entirely desire-driven, entirely voluntarily. Would you respond to what I've said and share the story?
Yeah. I love the question, and I love how, you took that time and the background to frame that. So I'll share a little bit about what I've been doing. I mean, so I had never really understood this concept of personal growth until maybe 2.5, 3 years ago. And it was, started from feeling burned out, like feeling frustrated with my life. I just remember, just feeling overwhelmed as a mom, trying to get work done at home, and even, on my days off, like on a weekend, and just, never had a date with my husband, never, just like feeling like every time I had any free time, there was like 100 to-do lists, including washing dishes, folding the clothes, and all of those. And there was no spark and no magic in my life whatsoever. And I went from...
May I ask you, is the spark and the magic something you had before that was eroded with being a hardworking professional and raising 3 children, or had it not really ever been there before?
Yeah, that's a good question. My husband and I got married in my 4th year of medical school. So I think you're a little bit familiar with this type of story where so we got married and we didn't live together because, he had his place and we were trying to figure out where I was going for residency. So, anticipating a move. And so finally, we moved, we started like having a home together. I think it was a few weeks before I was about to have our first kid. And I was an intern, which is the busiest season in a training, in a doctor's training. And so that's sort of how our life as a married couple started. So we started with quite a bit of, overwhelm and burnout. But before that, I think, I can't quite remember the number of years now, it's all a blur, but we were dating for, I think, close to 10 years. And so it started with a spark, it started with a lot of chemistry. But it was also, like as you kind of progress in a more adult part of your life, with a job and with a busy job and this starting with children, it was hard. It was a very hard period.
Okay, so that's just good to know, because I think sometimes listeners are like, well, I've never had it. What do you mean rekindle the spark? And others are like, oh, I had it, but I have no idea how to get it back. So let's continue with your story.
Yeah, so that was, kind of the beginning. And I think, the lack of spark in my daily life also reflected the lack of spark in our marriage. And even though we were kind of maybe deep inside knew that we wanted to be supportive of one another, but it was kind of like you say, I don't know if it was necessarily conflict free, but it was like it had the semblance of how do you phrase it? Conflict free.
The conflict free, passion free relationship.
I think that sort of that's from my memory, probably, how I would characterize that period of our life. And that's not to say there was definitely conflict. I'm more of a facing conflict and let's bring it out in the open type of person. And I think my husband came from a very different way of coping with that, from his family background. But so there was always, a little bit of conflict, but in general, there was really, it was that description. And then what started was there was a threat to the one thing that I thought was going well, which was my job. And it just really made me reconsider really what I wanted to do with my life, including did I maybe want to quit medicine? I was seriously considering that. And the really wonderful thing was my husband was very supportive. He said, and the other background is my husband is an engineer turned stay-at-home homeschooling dad. So, my income is the sole source of income for our family for the most part. And so he said, money's really not that important. And, what you do what makes you happy. Like, don't do a job that you're going to be miserable at. And so it was, so I think like sort of deep inside, I felt very supported in that way. But anyway, so I started this whole process of like going to my first non-medical training. This is all on Zoom, and made a lot of sort of personal revelations and really started my personal growth journey. It was like the first time, I don't even think I knew the term at the time, but that was, when I had even heard the term Dare to Dream, which is, the name of my company, but just like that concept never even occurred to me. And so that was the beginning. And this conference that I attended was a life planning conference. And so actually, you talk about, personal growth in a marriage. And I remember after feeling like my life was changed, attending this conference, the first thing I asked my husband is like, do you want to get life planned? And he was like, no, well, I don't know what that is. And oh no, I'm not interested. But anyway, fast forward, this was about a year ago. And at this time in the fall of 2022, my dad had just passed away. And I felt like we were ready for a new chapter in our life. And you mentioned the expired passports. My kids didn't even have passports at the time. And I had a expired passport and had not traveled outside of the US, I think, for over 10 years. And so I felt this sort of this yearning inside that, maybe we should start this new chapter and start traveling. And so it's interesting you say this, because the first trip that I suggested, the U.S. Virgin Islands, so it's outside of the continental U.S., which was a big deal for us at the time. My husband was very on board. He was like all excited, and, we all went on that trip. But after that trip, I had other ideas, and it got to the point where there were certain trips I had in mind that were like, far away to different continents that sounded very overwhelming to him. And so this was also something that I learned, which is, I might have this vision and this desire and this yearning to do something, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, my spouse has to. And I felt okay with that, and he was okay with that. So there's this moment where I had this conversation with him, and I said, hey, before my dad died, he was going to go to Taiwan, and he had friends who had invited him. And so when I learned that Taiwan had opened, as from the pandemic, I immediately said, I want to go. I want to go there, and, I'm going to bring my mom and meet with my dad's friend, who I had never met before, and bring the kids. And hopefully you want to come too. And that's sort of how I presented it. This is, my husband knows this is my style. So I'm like, yep, I already have this whole plan planned. And do you want to join? And, he thought about it, and he really wasn't that excited about it. He thought, well, that's a really long plane ride with these 3 kids. And, just a bunch of things, that he wasn't as excited about. And so after maybe like a day or two, we thought about it together, and we decided that I was just going to go with the kids. Like, I'm going to fly, with the 3 kids and meet my mom there. And, we're going to have a trip. But he wasn't going to be part of it. And I think that was, part of the journey that I probably haven't shared with anybody. Right. So like, when I have an idea, like my kids are all on board. Like when I say, hey, let's go do this.
I just want to give context for the conversation, because just to really emphasize, you hadn't left the United States for 10 years. And in the past year, you've taken, I believe, 6 international trips. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. So we've taken six trips outside the continental U.S. 3 of them were international or, cross continents, and 3 of them were in, like Hawaii. Yeah.
Okay. Well, just the fact that you're distinguishing which are cross-continental or not, like that's hysterical. But the point is that you'd done no traveling outside the U.S., and now you've taken 6. And I think you're sharing something super important, which is really essential for personal growth and specifically for marriage, which is that things are not on or off, black or white, yes or no. Like the first trip, your husband was a yes. You had the inspiration and he was a yes, and you all went. The second trip, you had the inspiration, and the bottom line is he was a no. And so that trip unfolded differently. And it sounds like it wasn't complicated for you. Was there any kind of grieving or resentment? Because your vision was for the family to go, and his vision was not to participate in the trip to Taiwan. What did that do for the nature of your connection?
I think the point, who I had evolved to by that time, I was really okay with it. There's, I'm sure there was grieving, because I'm like, he's not going to be there going through these experiences with us. But what I've learned throughout the journey, and I so appreciate my husband, who I believe is on a tremendous personal growth journey, just in a totally different style than how I'm doing it. But the one thing that I've always appreciated about him is that he's always given me space to be who I want to be. And I think at first, when I was growing, I thought, well, he had to grow in the same exact way. Like he has to go through this life planning program, and he has to, express himself the way that I express myself. And, he has to dare to dream. And I learned throughout the process that no, like he doesn't have to be that way at all. I mean, there are certain things that he does, that I don't do, and that really is important to him and that helps him grow. And so I think, there was probably a little bit of resentment on his part for a little while that, okay, my wife is taking the kids to this big trip without me. And then I think I grieved a little bit that he wasn't going to be there. But in the end, we were fine. He dropped us off at the airport. He drove us 3+ hours to Boston, and he picked us up. And, it was by that time, we sort of accepted that we gave each other space, and there was not like a dim spot in our connection, as a result of that.
And do you know how he spent the time when you were away? Was there some way that it was special for him?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So I think for that Taiwan trip, we were gone for about 2 weeks, and I think he just caught up on chores at home. And he's an introvert, so. I joke, I'm like, yeah, this is like heavenly for you, right? You get to be by yourself, at home and be quiet and have this quiet space all to yourself. But the cool thing is there was another trip we took later in the summer that he also decided that he was not going to go. And this is our 3-week adventure in Australia. And for him, it was
Oh, I watched that on social media. It was totally tremendous, but I somehow didn't register that he wasn't with you for that.
Yeah. So this was another trip that, I sort of I had this inspiration. I was trip planning, actually thinking about going to Alaska in the summer. And then I looked at the prices and gawked at the prices for Alaska. And then somehow that search led to, we should go to Australia. and then, started researching all of the amazing things that we can do in Australia and how much cheaper it would be than a cruise to Alaska, and presented the idea to first presented to my kids, because they're usually easier sell. And they were all for it. And then when I presented to my husband, he's like, wait, that's a really big country, and you have to go from this place, and you want to go what and do what, and how long are we going to be there? And it's right before school starts. And I thought, yeah, you're right. There are those are all true, but it's the only time we can go. Like, for everyone's schedules to work, this is the time that we could go. And if we're going to go all the way to Australia, I want to see all those things. And so yeah, like, it didn't bother, the crazy plan didn't bother me. And so that was another one where he decided that he wasn't going. But during that trip, when we were gone, he went and did a 2-week solo camping trip, drove from Vermont out to Colorado, and he was sharing pictures with me with what he was doing. And so that was, he was doing his own adventure, and I was thrilled, to see that he made use of that time. Amazing.
All right. Well, where are the other trips that you've taken? Where else have you gone this year?
Yeah, so there were a bunch that my husband came with us. We went to Maui last January, or this past January, and we did that together. And I'm glad, because as much as I like adventurous driving, the west end of Maui, those mountain roads, I have never seen anything like that before, and I'm really glad that he drove and not me. And then we went to this off the beaten path island called Eleuthera in the Bahamas as a family, and that was really, really amazing. What else did he go with us? And then next month we're going to, and he went to Puerto Rico with us. We did that one together. And then in a couple of weeks, we're going to Madeira, which is an autonomous island and belongs to Portugal, but it's closer to sort of the North African continent than anything else. It's right in the middle of the Atlantic. So yeah, so he's going, and actually, the other thing that I learned, as I kept pitching these crazy travel ideas to him, crazy at the time, no longer as crazy since we've done it, was, it just took him longer to warm up to it, right? So after not joining us for 2 of these cross-continental trips, I started, telling him about my ideas for next year, so we have, one of our big trips planned is going to the Galapagos, and some place that he would have never considered going. Like, if you had asked him, I'm sure 5 years ago, like, he would think I would probably die and never go to this place. But I told him about that idea, and he's like, yeah, let's go. And then I told him about the next trip's idea to go to Africa. And he, again, I don't think he ever thought that he was gonna go step foot in Africa. But because of who he's married to, and because he's seen me take the kids, to Asia and to Australia, he's, now he's really excited, actually. So yeah, that's the other thing, is that there's this time, and that's the space. Like, hey, we love each other and we have this amazing connection, and daily life has definitely been more magical and sparkly as a result of just me feeling the freedom to dream and to live those dreams, and feeling supported by my husband to do that, even if it doesn't necessarily involve him. But that, in the end, just took a little bit longer for him to accept that maybe, this is also the lifestyle that I want, and for him to take part of it too.
Yeah, my very favorite personal growth saying, there's so many like bumper sticker sayings in personal growth, but my absolute favorite one is, how you do anything is how you do everything. So I think it is totally tremendous to hear the way that in the course of a year, you have just summarily, in a desire-driven way, without any crisis, completely reinvented your family culture while building on all the solidity and foundation that was already present. But in any case, how you do anything is how you do everything. So I wonder, how does desire show up in the day-to-day interactions, in terms of the intimacy with your husband, in terms of choosing what you're going to have for dinner? Like, that's a place that can feel very like monotonous, like not leaving the US for 10 years and anticipating that for another 20, or you can dare to dream, honor your desire, as you've said. So how does that play out in choosing which color toothbrush you buy? Or, I have no idea, but when you talk about daily life having more magic, what do you mean concretely?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I love that. And I wholeheartedly agree. How you do one thing is how you do everything. And I think, like I said, a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, we just, it's sort of even sad that I would characterize as this, because it's really not part of who I see myself. But I really do think we had sort of this conflict-free, passion-free marriage. And partly, the personal growth journey, and also encountering your book, I started to sort of more intentionally cultivate that part of my marriage. I started to, I don't even know how the shift came, but I think that the thesis that you have in your book, that it is exactly that, the fear of conflict, and that's actually going to also lead that will kill passion. And I think when I sort of really internalized that, I realized, yeah, like, I don't have to be like, it's the differences that we have that is fueling our passion. And so if I just stop being afraid of being different, and him being different from me and me being different from him, and just let go of that fear, there, I think something sort of shifted there. And then the other thing that really helped me, Alexandra, was the part in your book, and feel free to fill in the details for me, that I love this scene from your book where you described, I think you were like at a dinner with at home, you had cooked dinner. You described the scene at home where there the young kids at the table, and your husband was at the end of this table, and you're looking at him and you're like, well, I could look at him as a co-parent, right? Like, how is he helping with the chores? Is he doing this? Or I could look at him in a totally different way. And I forget the words they use, something, like... Yeah,
I'll just fill it in. So if you haven't read my book, Uncompromising Intimacy, definitely do. When I reached out to have this conversation, it didn't occur to me that one could characterize this conversation as a testimonial for reading my book, not to in any way minimize everything that you have created for yourself, but to see that as a spark is super fun. But yes, I remember the day when I realized I either ignored my husband at the table because he didn't need me. He's a grown up and could feed himself, and my kids demanded my attention. Or I could look at him as like a really helpful co-parent, because here we were with the kids. But what I had not ever done up until that time was to look at him and experience the sexy man at the other end of the table, the man who is my lover, like this whole aspect of our life that just was never activated unless it was private time at the end of the day and we were both naked. But to be able, without doing anything sexual or inappropriate at the family dinner table, to just see him in that way, simultaneously, of course, took a part of me that was typically dormant and activated it. So that's the part that you're talking about, that really we can go through daily life seeing our daily life partner, or we can see so much more of who this person is, and in that way present so much more of ourselves.
That's it. That scene really was so influential for me, because after I read it, and I think I listened to it on audiobook, like I sort of, it just like this, it just something clicked for me where I'm like, why am I wasting my time, looking at my husband? And I think we all probably do it as a, parent, as a mom to young kids. It's like, like one, you need someone to help you do chores. And then two, it's like, oh, I don't have to worry about that person. But there's this third option that it just never even occurred to me, which is, or I could just look, even if you don't have the opportunity to do anything, but you can change how you think. And I think so that there are a few things. So, the personal growth work that I've been doing has really focused on, life is shorter than we think. And there is going to be a time when we don't get to live the things that we right now just take for granted. And, the intimate life in your marriage, the passion that you have in your marriage. And like at one point, we felt that in a relationship, but it had sizzled. And I think for me, I was thinking, but, at the end of my life, like, am I going to regret having that sizzle, like, in our 30s or 40s? There's just something like, and even last year when I saw my dad die, there's something so humbling about seeing someone take their last breath. And there's something so final, when you see them take their last breath. And so I just remember, seeing my dad, who used to be so alive, just sort of just being so weak and taking his last breath. And even though it looked peaceful, I thought, that there's a life there that I don't want to take for granted, that there's a life that I have right now that I don't want to take for granted. And I think that, it's that, that desire, to live life to the fullest, that, sort of like that makes me realize, like, of course I'm going to look at my husband, as my lover and as someone who I find incredibly attractive. And it's like, all I had to do is just change the way I look at him if when we're just sitting at the dinner table with the kids around. And I think that it just made all the difference. And then the other thing, like, the other shift that I made was, it's like if you were a teenager and, the only place where you could make out was like in your car, like people get really excited, right? Because it's like forbidden. Like you can't, like there's no place for you to make out. So people are like, oh, wow. and so like that's sort of the case when you're when you're an adult with young kids in the home, because you just like, there's really, like you said, there's very little private time. And so I started looking at that as sort of an opportunity to grow passion. Like, okay, we're like teenagers. Like you can't, like you maybe you can kiss, but like you can't, there's like not a ton that you could do at home in front of, and because there's some kid around the corner somewhere. And so I think that's what I mean by adding the magic. I just sort of changed the way I looked at things. And then I never said anything to my husband. I mean, I tried to, he saw your book on my drawer somewhere, and it really scared him because I thought something was wrong with our marriage. So aside from that.
Because why else would you be reading about that?
But aside from, that, I didn't tell him to read the book with me. But it's just changing how I approach the way I looked at things. And I think it's made such a big difference. And it's like little things. And I think like you said, awakening the personal growth part where I'm like, I'm going to work on a desire-based life and let go of my fears. I think that's also helped sort of fuel passion in all areas of our life, including in our marriage.
That's phenomenal. And the way that you have made that happen, evidenced in the travel, I can only imagine. I mean, we're not going to discuss it now, but I can only imagine like what that has meant for your children as well, who clearly are totally into it and learning how to say yes to their own desires and their own opportunities. And I'm going to guess, speak up about what they want. I don't mean like, I want hamburgers, or I don't mean that kind of, children can say what they want. I mean, in a much deeper and more soulful way. It's just like, I really hope the takeaway for anybody listening is that with a little bit of attention and a lot of conviction or devotion, you really can transform things at an astonishing rate without it blowing anything up. Like, that's the other thing is, so often I think people imagine the way to change is kind of blow things up, but somehow you've created a totally different life and such an up-leveled marriage without blowing anything up, just by bringing more meaning, more magic, more connection. So I want to ask you what I ask every guest, based on the fact that intimate relationships are the ultimate vehicle for personal growth. What have you learned about yourself, Weili, as a result of being married specifically to your husband?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely resonate with that statement that, that marriage is sort of the ultimate vehicle for personal growth. There's something, you just have to be so honest, right? Because you might think, okay, yeah, I got this. But then when you're living with somebody, you just it just takes that up to one other level. I said this before, but I think I really learned that, it's the differences. Like it's okay to be different. And it's just like the thesis of, uncompromised. It's okay to not compromise. It's okay to be different. And it's the difference. Like, I think back to, well, why was I attracted to my husband when I first met him? It's because he's so different from me. And so even though I had this idea that, a couple grows together by attending, seminars together and reading the same book and discussing the book, that was never going to happen with my husband. Like that's not his style. And so I think I learned to embrace that difference, that I grow the way I grow, he grows the way he grows. And somehow there's, our connection grows deeper every day, despite our differences and how we grow. That's what's beautiful and passionate about our marriage. And so, yeah, just learning to embrace differences and to love someone despite being different, and to be loved despite being different.
That's magnificent. I think self-acceptance sounds so boring, but it is really like the gold that we get to tap into. I know I've said that in a much more bland way than what you've said, but thank you so much for that really amazing response. And I can't resist a super cheesy kind of statement, because there's something to me about you being a sleep doctor, and Dare to Dream is your podcast. There's something about sleeping and dreaming, except that like when you can sleep and really have amazing dreams, then during your waking hours, they come true. Is that anything that you've ever thought about, the kind of coherence and integration of your really important professional life as Dr. Gray, the sleep doctor, and then Weili Gray living the dreams?
Oh, I love that. It's funny that you mentioned that because that is the latest goal that I'm working on, and I think I'm going to be working on for the entire year because, despite being a sleep doctor, I was struggling with getting enough sleep because I feel like all this energy, especially towards when close to bedtime, like, when you're supposed to get ready for bed, and I, just feel excited and work on something, and so my big challenge in the upcoming year is actually to work on sleep, and I've done it maybe for 2 weeks now, and it's been really amazing, and I think I'm gonna be able to live my dream life so much more effectively after committing to sleeping 8 hours every day.
That is so great. Okay, well, your podcast, Dare to Dream Physician, is obviously really this incredible, scintillating invitation to doctors to really dare to dream. And I want to make a really strong plug because I've listened to many episodes, including your most recent one, which I just adored. That if you're not a physician, but you're somebody who works hard and has a long to-do list and has all kinds of responsibilities and feels that certain ways of living are just not available to you, well, you don't need to be a physician to benefit from Dr. Gray's incredible conversations about how to live a life that is driven by desire and dreaming. Anything you want to add as we complete our conversation?
No, I just want to thank you for inviting me and thank you for having your podcast. I've really enjoyed your podcast. I think it's just a great resource, and I recommend it to people all the time. And I was just recently catching up on the episodes, and I learned so much, and I love the variety that you put out too. So yeah, thank you for what you do.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for contributing to that variety with this conversation right now.